let's get started. First, I'm going to add a label for this, give it a name, AI powered beverage order machine. Make it bigger, font, bold 40, center, and I'm going to use this, right? Maybe this, right? So the first control that we're going to add is a camera itself. So I'll put it at the center, right? So this is me, you can see me. What we're going to do is that we're going to set this camera to be streaming, right? So this camera is streaming, and I'm going to set the stream rate to be 100 milliseconds, and I'm going to collect the image, right, into this collection, camera img, and I'm going to collect camera one dot stream, right? So this will, what happens is that when you select this control, it will collect the stream, or rather the binary of the images, and store in this collection itself, right? To test this, we're going to add an image, put it over here. I'll retrieve the image itself. So take note that this is a collection, right? So that's why I'm going to take the first one and get the URL of this image, right? Make it bigger, right? So if you try this out, right? So there you go. If I do this, if I do this, if I do this, there you go, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to automate this instead of manually someone clicking this guy. So what we can do is that we can add a timer, right, over here, right? So first thing first, I'm going to set the duration to be, let's make it 4 seconds, right? 4000 milliseconds, and I can put it into an auto start, true, into auto start, and I'm going to make it in the repeat as well, so that it can auto restart the timer, right? So over here, when the timer starts, right, I'm going to select the camera 1, right? Likewise, when timer ends, right, we're going to select camera 1 as well, right? So what happens is that, just look at the timer itself, right? Every 3 seconds, you just take an image, right? If you try this, 1, 2, 3, right, there you go. So this is how you can automate to click this guy, right? Close this. Alright, so once we are able to retrieve the images, right, we're going to send to a face API to detect the emotion, or rather whether there's a face inside or not. So to do this, we're going to add a button first. Just drag it over here, action, flow, right? So over here, I'm going to create a new flow. Okay, I'll give this flow a name. I'll just call AI order demo, right? So the first thing first, I'm going to retrieve, I'm going to set a variable. So this will capture the camera, the binary itself, right, from PowerApps. So how I get this information is that I can ask in PowerApps. Likewise, second, I will need to know this image is from which frame, right? Likewise, I'm going to call this camera ID, give this a string, give this I'm going to ask in PowerApps as well, right? Then this is a binary, right? What we're going to do is that we're going to convert this into a stream itself. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do a compose over here, right? Over here under the expression, there's a lot of functions that you can do. Over here, we're going to do a conversion, right? We're going to convert data URI to a binary itself. So over here, and this is the first object that we retrieve, right? Alright, then the next thing, what we're going to do is that we're going to detect whether there's any face inside the image or not, right? So if I do a quick search under face API, indeed I can detect whether there's a faces, etc, 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 right? But over here, I'm going to use another method. I'm going to do a HTTP post because I'm going to get the emotion as well. I'm going to reuse this flow for the other screen, right? So over here, first thing first, I'm going to do a HTTP post, right? And of course, I need to get the URI, the API key, etc., right? So how do you get the API key? First thing first, of course, you can just go to Microsoft Azure, search for community services, and there's a free tier that you can use. It's pretty decent, right? Or you can go to Azure portal, right? I'm going to create a face API. So I'm going to create this. I'll give this a name. I'll just call AI Dream dash demo. Right, I'm going to create in this resource group, this location. Well, over here I'm going to create a standard one. I'm going to create a new resource group called AI Dream dash demo. Right, so it will create these resources under this resource group. So when I click create, it will create a API key for me. Right, so it's deploying. Alright, once you finish, just go to the resources, right? So over here, right, I can click into the key itself and get the API keys, API key, right? First thing first, what we're going to do is that we're going to retrieve the endpoint, right? The endpoint for this REST call. So over here, right? So this is the URI that I'm going to get, and then over here, in the header, I'm going to define the content type, right? So the content type would be application, so this will be a stream itself, right? I'm going to copy paste from someone else, application slash tag stream, right? So over here, I'm going to just add detect, right? So this is to detect the faces, right? And of course, on the API key, for those who are familiar with community services, right, we're going to add this at the header, and then we're going to paste the key itself, which I generated over here. Over here, I'm going to copy. Sorry, come back here. Right, I'm going to paste the API key as well. And under the queries, right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to only retrieve things that we need, right? So over here under the queries, right, return face attribute, right, I'm going to need I just need the age, right? I need the gender, and I need the emotion, right? So these are three things that we need. And what's the body for this REST call is the output for this compose, right? So once we do this, we're going to save this first. We're going to respond the result back to the PowerApps, right? So over here, what we can do is that we can add a response over here, right? And of course, the body would be the core itself, right? But over here, we're going to attach a schema to this body, right? So what I can do is that I can actually use this sample payload, right? Again, I copy paste from my notepad. So basically over here, you have the face ID, the position, right, as well as all the emotions that you need, right? So over here, it will create a schema for me, right? I'm going to save this. All right. So what I've been doing here is that I created a flow so that it will do a REST API call to face it to community services and then respond back over here, right? So over here, I'm going to attach the button to this AI order dash demo. All right, adding. And then as you can see, it requires two input, which what we have defined, right? So over here, I'm going to again get the image, right? First, camera img dot url, all right, and then the second input, this is from screen 0, let's say, right? All right, so this will actually get the response back, but we don't stop here. We're going to collect the response, right? So I'm going to do a collect, right? Collect, and I give this collection a name called face response. All right, and this is a response that I'm going to collect. right? So over here, so whenever I click this button, right, let me get rid of this. Whenever I click this button, it will send the image to a face API itself, right? So to show that, I'm going to insert a gallery to show you, right? It's the face response. When you select the layout to be a title only, I'm going to just show the face ID itself, right? To shows you that the call has successfully. All right. So if I play this, right? So again, the timer over here will just auto create the images, right? So when I click this button, right, this is where it actually sending the images to my flow, all right, and then get a face ID, right? If I go back to my flow itself, right, go back here, okay, right, there you go, right, you can see it actually runs successfully, and this is the response that you get, right? All this information, right? Okay, right, it seems like this works, right? So what we're going to do now is that we're going to automate the process. We can schedule this, right? So over here, let me copy this thing, right? So on the button itself, right? So on timer end, I'm going to do more than just select the camera, right? Once you select the camera, right, I want to sort of like check whether there's a face within the images within this camera itself. So what I can do now is that I can actually do a count number of items in this collection, right? So if let's say there's more than 0 item, or when there's an item within this collection itself, it means there's someone standing in front of the camera. So over here, I can do a simple count rows, right? I'm going to count this one, right? The collections that we have. If this is more than 0, right? So what we're going to do is that if let's say this is more than 0, we're going to clear this collection so that I can use it for my next screen, right? So of course I want to navigate, so I want to navigate to a next screen, right? So maybe I'll stop over here. I will just create a new screen, create a blank screen, give it a background, make it into summer. Field itself, right? So if I go back over here, back to my timer, right? So if there's some item in this collection, I'm going to clear the response, right? And then after that, I'm going to navigate to screen 2. Screen 2. All right, I'm going to navigate to screen 2, and the transition, let's put uncover, right? So when there's an object within this collection itself, you clear this, and then if you navigate to the next screen, right? So what happens is that if there's no object within this collection itself, right? So what we're going to do is that we are going to call or send these images to the face to the flow that we created, right? So that we can reuse this, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to so remember just now over here we actually created this one. I'll just copy this, right? Back to my timer. All right, so I'm going to paste this, right? Just one thing, note that I'm going to clear collect instead of collect, so that I am able to collect all the information, right, over here, right? And then of course I close the parentheses. So what happens is that whenever it detects if there's no object within this collection itself, it will send this image to the flow itself and run, right? And over here I'm going to modify this, right? I'm going to clear the response, right? Right, so we're going to try this, right? Let's play, clear this, 1 2 3, right? Sending a flow, and there you go, it goes to a screen 2, right? So likewise, we're going to do a similar thing for our screen 2, right? So over here, I'm going to again add a camera, right, and then I'm going to put it over here, right. So over here I'm not going to put images because I know how it works already, right. And then the control, right, I'm going to add a timer, right. And of course the duration I'm going to set it into 4 milliseconds, right. Make it into a auto start, true, make it into make it repeat, true, right. And of course we're going to set this camera as streaming, right. So set the stream rate to be 100 on stream, make it true, and select, right. I'm going to clear select camera image, right. So this is camera 2 dot stream, right. So of course from here, let's see, on timer start, select camera 2, alright. On timer end, right, I'm going to select camera 2, so select camera 2 as well, right. So likewise we're going to do the same thing, right. Over here I'm going to copy this, right. Timer on time end, right. Do this if count, if this collection, right, over here more than 0, I'm going to do the same thing again, but this time I'm going to send from screen 1 and I'm going to navigate to screen 3, right. So over here I'll just add another screen, right, screen 3, back to here, I'll just call this screen, navigate to screen 3, alright. And then likewise do the same thing, right. So I'm going to try this, right. Over here, clear object, right. Start, I'm going to clear, right. 1 2 3, sending, right, get the information, right. Over here 1 2 3, right. Again sending to the flow itself, right. There you go, right. So it can navigate to the third screen, right. So to help debug, I like to I'm going to use a data table. So to help debug, I'm going to, let me delete this. To help debug, I'm going to add a gallery as well, so that you can see that, you know, there's one object within it, right. I'm going to select a face response, layout title, right. Again, same thing, right, the face ID. Okay, so put it over here, right. So likewise for screen 3, I'll add a background, maybe add sand, and then I'm going to make it into a field, right. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. So over here I'm going to add a camera, right. Just a tip, right, for you to be consistent on all the camera control, right, because you may not want to have one camera over here and then on the other side is over here, or you adjust manually, right. So what you can do is that you can actually refer to the object itself. So for example, the width itself, I want this follow the camera 2 dot width, right. So I'm going to copy this, right. So likewise for x, I'm going to copy the x coordinate, for y, copy the y coordinate, and for the height, right, 2 stop height, right. So what happens is that if I go back to screen 2 and today maybe I just want to move it over here, make it smaller or make it bigger, right. So you see this will actually follow, right. So same thing, we're going to set the stream rate to be 100, right. Oops, to be 100, and then make it into streaming, right? Tool, and then on select, we need to do a clear collect into this guy, right? And I'm going to collect camera 3 dot stream, right? Then I'm going to do the same thing as well. I'm going to add a timer. Just put it over here, right? I can do the same thing over here as well. So I'm going to set the duration to 3 seconds. Repeat, right? Repeat. Auto start, right? Or you can actually do it over here as well, like what I did previously. And over here, I'm going to do the same thing on timer start. I'm going to select camera 3, and on timer end, I'm going to select camera 3 as well, right? So before that, I'm going to add a screen for the suggestion, right? So over here, again, I can do the same thing. I'll just copy paste from here, right, copy, back to the timer over here. So you're going to navigate to screen 4, right? And this time it's coming from screen 2, right? So likewise for debug, I will add a collection. Just add data source to this, right? Show as a face ID, right? Of course, it's a little bit hard to see, right? So I'm going to change the font to white color. All right. So let's try this, starting from screen 1, right? So the first screen will actually detect whether there's someone with inside the image or the camera can see. There you go, it can see. Go to screen 2, right? It should see the same thing as well, right? So it's calling the flow, right? Every 3 seconds. Right, sometimes, right? There you go. The face ID is here. Navigate to screen 3. It's going to do the same thing as well. 2, 3. There you go, right? So over the last screen, we're going to put a suggestion, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to do a simple comparison. We're going to compare the emotion, right, on screen 2 and screen 3, and we can use a simple one. Let's say we use a happiness, right? So if you notice, back to our flow, right? So if I refresh, so you can see these all the calls actually calling. All right. Note that you should see some of the failed flow, right? This is because the camera is initializing, right, and it can't get the camera string itself, right? But it's okay. That shouldn't be the showstopper, right? So if I go into here, right, so I'm going to compare let's see, I'm going to compare the happiness, right? So how do we compare, right? So a simple method is that we can actually send this information, right, into a databases, and then we can just run a SQL or a T-SQL query to retrieve the information, right? So again, back to my Azure portal, I'm going to create Azure SQL, right? Azure SQL, right, and create a SQL database, right? Create. Okay, I'm going to select the resource group that I created, right? I'm going to give this a name, AI demo, let's call it AI beverage demo, right? I'm going to create a new server as well. I'll just call AI beverage demo. Alright, let's see. Alright, so I'll just call user, give it a password. Alright, give the password. Alright, your new server. Right, I'm not going to use the elastic pool for this demo purpose. Alright, and I'm going to create a basic one, right? So over here there's a multiple options. Of course, you do have the options for the business critical, right? But for this, I'm just going to create a basic one, right? And I'm just have a maximum for 2 GB, right? So it's only like $5 per month, right? So it's pretty good for you to have a quick prototype, right? So over here, right, I'm going to create this SQL database, right? So while waiting for this, right, we're going to back into our flow to see how we can retrieve the information about the happiness, right? So we're going to add this our flow. Right, again, I'm going to initialize a variable. Right, I'm going to call this happy, and this should be a float, right? So I'm going to get some info, some data about this variable itself, right? So note that over here we'll get a response in a JSON format, right? So what we can do is that we can actually pass the JSON, right? So over here, JSON, right? So the content itself are coming from the body, right? Again, the schema, right? I'm going to copy from use the sample payload, copy the schema, right? There you go, right? So just to double check, right? Because if you notice, this is supposed to be a float, but it represents as an integer itself. This is because on the sample itself, I mean on the sample payload that I have, it shows a 0, right? So to mitigate this, I'm going to just change all this into a float itself, right? I can just do something like just change it to a 0.1. Right. So once I do that, there you go. These all become a number, right? So once I pass the JSON itself, I'm going to assign, right? I'm going to assign this value, right, to the variable that I created just now. Set variable, right? I'm going to set happy, right? Of course, the value itself, right? So over here, you see, after I pass the JSON, I'm able to get the information, right, about this JSON, right? If I click on happiness, take note that, right, this is an array, right? That's why it will apply to everything, right? Over here, of course, you do have the options to select the first object of this array, right? But for demo purpose, I'm just going to apply to all, right? And then we're going to insert this into a SQL database, right? Maybe before that, let's see if our database has created, right? It's done, right? So over here, I'm just going to use a built-in query editor. I'm going to log in. Right, so right now there's nothing, right? So over here, back to our flow, right? We are going to compare the happiness, all right? And of course, we need to identify the emotion is from which image, right? So that's why we can just create a simple table, create a table. We can just call it happy face, right? And we're going to create ID, right? We're going to make it into a primary key, right? Of course, we're going to create a happy, right? So this will be a float, right? So as simple as this, right? To run this, right? So once we refresh, we should see we created the table itself, and these are the column, right? ID and happy, right? So we're going to put these, integrate these databases into the flow itself, right? So if I could go back over here, right, add an action, right, I'm going to have a SQL, right? I just search for SQL. Over here, I want to insert row, right? So over here, I'm going to make a connection to my SQL itself. So over here, right, of course these are all my existing SQL, but over here I'm going to add a new connection, right? I'll just call AI brings dash demo, the SQL server name, right? So I should be able to retrieve from here, right? So this is the server name. I will go back to here. SQL server name, the SQL server database. Can't remember what's the name that I created. Yeah, AI beverage demo. Back to here. AI beverage demo for the username. Oops. Username, right? Password, right? Create. So of course, if let's say you have an on-premise SQL server, you can do that as well. You just need to install the agent, right? So over here, right? So there you can see this is the table that we created called happy face. And over here, right, we're going to insert the ID, right, and the scoring itself, which is the happy, right? So what happens is that whenever there's an image sent over, right, it will just insert insert the image over here, right? Let me save this. All right, we're going to try this, right? So back to this, right? So right now, oops, if we do a select all happy face, right, it should be nothing, right? So let's try this, right? Again, every 3 seconds, get a string, get a face ID, go to the next page, right? Likewise, get an image, right? Send it over, there you go, the face ID retrieve, go to the next screen, we're going to do the same thing as well, get an ID, right, go to the next screen, right? So at this stage, we should see the, let me refresh this, right? So over here, under the succeeded one, right? I should see some so over here this inserted, right? So over here, if I run this, right? So let's see. Right, let me modify this for a second. Alright, back to here, just do a debugging, right? So if I click in, right, if you can see in the error message, invalid type expect an integer but got numbers under this age, right? So we're going to edit this again on the pass.json. Right, age, we're going to change this to a number, right? So let's try again to see whether it's solve out the error, right? So back to my screen one, play this again, again, 1, 2, 3, get an image, right, get an ID, do the same thing again, 1, 2, 3. Right, get the face ID, navigate to next screen. Likewise, is it because you can't see my face? Alright, get a face ID, go to the next screen. Right, so if I refresh over here, alright, I should see succeeded. So what it means is that if I run over here, there you go, right? I can see all this information, Alright, so far so good, right? And of course over here in the last screen we're going to compare these two, right? Or of course if let's say you have a multiple images, you can compare all. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is that if I go back to my PowerApps, right? So over here again I'm going to do I want it to be auto trigger action, right, to retrieve the information, right? So let's see how we get the information, right? So over here I can do something like, you know, select top one ID from happy face where ID, right, should be bigger than 0, right? Because take note that the first screen doesn't count, right? Of course, if let's say we have multiple entry into database, we're going to group by the ID itself, right? Then we're going to order by the average of happy, right? And in this manner, right? So if you try to run, right? So over here, right, if you can see, right, indeed this is the highest, right, it returns 1 to me, right? So how do we can in PowerApps, right, we're going to run this SQL, right? How we're going to do again? We can add a button, right, to start with. Action flow, create a new flow. AI drinks demo dash demo 2, right? So over here I don't need in a way I don't need any entry itself. What I'm going to do is that I'm just going to fire up a SQL command, right? So that's why over here I'm going to search for SQL. Similarly, right, SQL. Over here I can execute a SQL query, right? So of course over here I'm going to fire up this query itself, right? And then I'm going to retrieve the so-called like the result, you know, from this command itself. So I'm going to initialize a variable. Initialize a variable. Oops. Please have increment. Going to initialize a variable. Just call this a suggestion. And of course this is a string itself, right? So we're going to get this information, right? So if you case over here execute a SQL query, so this is the so-called like the result that I can get, right? So if I put it over here, right, and you notice that again it will created this apply to each for me, right? However, take note that in this loop you can't initialize multiple variable. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a variable before the loop itself, right? Since we select the top one, which means it only return one object. So over here I'm going to create a suggestion string. I'll just give it none, right? So over here instead of doing initialize, right, so I assign the value, right? So set variable suggestion, right, to the ID itself, right? So this is how you can get the result from so-called like from the SQL, right? So after that we're going to respond this information back to PowerApps. So again we can do something like, you know, respond to PowerApps, right? So you have two ways, either via the HTTP response that we mentioned, previously, or I can respond in this manner. So over here I'm going to respond let's say respond to text, right? I'll just call it suggestion, right? And then I'm going to respond this suggestion, right? So save, right? I'm going to save this, back to here, attach this, right? So alright, so it's a adding, right? However, take note is that there's no input required, so I can do something like this, right? Again, I'm going to collect the response, right? Clear collect. I'm just going to call this suggestion, or maybe I call it, yeah, I'll just call it a suggestion, right? And these are suggestions that is returned from this, right? So get rid of this guy, right? And then of course insert. I'm going to do to debug, right? This is a suggestion, right? And it will only return the suggestion for me, right? And I think that we're going to do is that we're going to erase this, right? Every time we have the data, we run this kiosk itself, right? So before that, let's try whether this button works or not, right? So over here, it should return 1, right? So if I go back to the PowerApps, run this, right? It's actually firing up a SQL command. Alright, so there you go, you see, so this is the response, right? So what we're going to do is that once we get the suggestion, we're going to remove delete the data within this table itself, right? So to do this, we can do something like just get I can just do something like, you know, delete from happy face where ID less than 5, right? So if I run this, right, and if I run this again, right, so there's nothing. Of course we can embed, you know, this query back to our flow itself, because once we responded to the PowerApps, then we want to remove, we can execute this again, right? So over here, this is how, you know, you're able to send back the information, and then we set the databases over here, right? Right, so back to here, right? So this is the result itself. Okay, so what we are going to do is that first thing first, we're going to retrieve the information about this, right? So again, this in a collection, right? So I can do a simple one. Let's say I add a label, right? So let's get this item called gallery 4 dot selected, right, dot right suggestion, right? So this will actually get the suggestion from this one, right? So over here we're going to do some we're going to do some changes. For example, instead of telling them 1 or 2, let's do some suggestion, right? So if this suggestion, let's say goes to 1, or maybe, yep, equals to 1, right? Oops, okay, maybe I do some equals to 1, right? So I'm going to return, let's say, apple juice, right? Else I return orange juice. Right, let's see what's the error. Oh, because this is a text, I'm gonna do something like this. Oops. do something like this. Apple juice. Oh, so let's see. What's the error over here? Alright, equals to 1. Double column. Juice. Orange juice, right? So of course I can put some like, I suggest, right, apple juice. Okay, get rid of this. So over here, bowl. Alright, of course I can make the text bigger. Okay, so if it returns the one, you suggest apple juice. If not, you suggest orange juice. Alright, and then after that we're going to we want this to be automated, right, instead of like manually clicking this button, right? So again, I can add a control on timer, right? My favorite timer. Alright, just put somewhere here. I'll just put a 5-second. And for this, I'm going to put an auto start. Right, I'm going to put an auto start, but I'm not going to repeat, right? So, or maybe I put a longer. Let's see. I put a 10-second. Right. So over here on timer start, right? I'm going to of course, yeah, you have two ways. Either you can select this button, or I can actually, just copy this button. So on timer start, I'm going to do this. Right, and then on timer end, I'm going to navigate back to screen 1. Right, I'll just do uncover. Alright, then I can get rid of this button, right? So let's do a try. Okay. Okay. So what we have done is that we auto run this function, right? And then it should give a suggestion, and then after 10 seconds, it should goes back to this screen 1. All right. So let's try this, right? I'm going to start this, right? Just look at the camera. Alright, get the face ID, do the same thing again. That is pop the light. Alright, get the face ID, go to the next screen. Okay, let's try the small design. Alright, get a face ID. Alright, give suggestion, or maybe I smile too slow, right? It should give a suggestion, right? Then after 10 seconds, it should go back here, right? So let's examine this, right, to see whether it runs successfully. So here, right, let's see what's responded, right? It responded 1, right? Maybe let us try one more time. That let's try to get a response for 2, right? I'm going to start this, right? Detect your face. Right, get a face ID. I'm not going to smile for this image. Right, I'm going to smile. Alright, get the face ID, and then it should call. There you go. I suggest a orange juice, right? So the final things that that you can do is actually to hide all these object, right? So for example, this one, right, I can just turn it off. The button, I can get rid of it, and of course the timer, right, I can get rid of it as well. Over here, I'm going to get rid of this object. I don't need this object. I don't need this, right? I'm going to hide this as well, right? And of course, likewise for the gallery, gallery 2 for debugging, I'm going to hide this, I'm going to hide this, and of course the timer I'm going to hide as well. Timer, right? So there you go, right? That's how you create AI powered beverage order machine kiosk. So